First thing that I'd like to share with you, and it's both literal and figurative, you all have a seat at the Tremco table because you're here today. So if any of you wonder why we do or don't do something, the team that makes those decisions is here today, including me. There's no distance really between that team and you and me, so I guess one of the things to think about when you leave here is, one of the things I'm really proud of at Tremco is that this is exactly the distance between you and us, meaning if you want to come visit us in Cleveland, if you want to have a further review, if you want to actually sit in my office and say, I think you're really stupid, why don't you do this? I welcome the conversation. So that's a serious invitation. So the first thing that I want to talk about, when it was explained to me what a perpetual building was, and I got to read it to you because I wrote it down. It's a building designed and constructed with components that can be monitored and maintained or restored, resulting in a very long service life, right? Sounds very good. And then I thought about if all of us here in this room had had a recent heart attack, this is real data, there are 3 things the doctor wants you to do. Don't smoke, more exercise, better diet. Statistically, and the data is only getting worse year by year, 14 of you, if there's 100 of us in the room, 14 of you won't do any of that. 40 of you will only do 1, 31% will do 2, and only 31 of you, will do 2, and only 4 of us will do all 3. So when I thought of us talking about maintaining a building, and I said, we can't even maintain ourselves, I was like, well, this is a pretty daunting topic, right? And I run Tremco. And I thought, well, what's my first thought about why this is true? And I thought, well, here's a good example. Put a bag of Doritos in my hands, I'm going to eat the whole bag, right? So there's something emotional going on in this whole area. So I wanted to share that heart attack thing for a moment, and to say that the why isn't enough, right? So when we think about what's so compelling about what we heard today, the why about why we should do the 3 things after we have a heart attack is very, very clear and compelling, and most of us won't do it, right? And the why about maintaining our buildings, right? Again, very, very compelling, and most of us won't do it. So I'll share a few other anecdotes with you, and I sort of collect these, right? So this is a lot of sort of behavioral science that goes on, right? So, you know, when I sit and run a company with 2,000 people in it, right, there's a lot of behavioral science going on when there's little old me and 2,000 people out there, right? And there's about 30 of you here today. And so, you know, how do we affect and change the behavior around the buildings that we're talking about? So I'll share another little interesting building tidbit just to think about. So one of the magazines that I subscribe to that I really like is called Home Power. And if any of you have ever read it, it's about people that want to go off the grid. And one of the interesting behavioral things that goes on is that, so these people are very, very energy conscious, right? And so they're thinking, they have different desires about why they do it. But the very first thing they do when they decide to go off the grid is they make very, very minor lifestyle changes, and in general reduce their energy consumption by 2/3. So you think about that for a moment. Now it's obvious, I think, to most of you, why do they do that, right? Because there's a linear relationship between the KWs on your roof and the capital cost, right, to get it to run the stuff in your house. But why did these really, really smart people that really live their life in such a manner to make that choice, why did it take that large capital expenditure for them to only then finally make the energy reduction decision? It's a rhetorical question, but I think about these things. All right, we're on to post-it number 2. All right, so a couple of 2 cents on the why as far, you know, sort of where we live at Tremco, right? The why, I think, is a lot about community. The why is about belonging. The why is about a higher purpose. The why is in what I do matters, right? So to me, these are big whys that are in Tremco. I don't have the exact answer about what's going to change. What's the why going to be that's going to make this a prevalent building practice. So the Tremco mission statement, which sits on the back of my business card, right, which is right where our quality policy is. So we say, provide high-performance building solutions. So when I got the call to say, well, you want to talk to this group, I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what we do. So when you think of Tremco as we talked about it today, right, there's the 6 sides of the building, right? You had roofing on the one side. You've got our construction sealants and waterproofing that do the other 4 sides in the facade and the below ground. So of course, that's very much the business we're in. But the thing, if I try to really, really simplify what makes Tremco special in providing that perpetual building, it's that we obsess on and focus on the interfaces. So what we believe is that traditionally, manufacturers are inherently component-driven, but where those components come together and you have those 2 interfaces going on, who's responsible, this guy or this guy, right? So our whole strategy is to go at those interfaces and design unique solutions for that and take responsibility for that. So by way of example, if you were to come to Cleveland and go to what we call our Mimico plant, but it's a construction sealants and waterproofing plant, in there are 2 test walls. And those have been very, very significant expenditures, but anybody in here who has an assembly that you think is a good idea for your project, and you want us to prove to you how that assembly will work, not only to the standards, but we test to failure. We're the only manufacturer in the industry that you can come visit us. We'll put that test wall assembly together, and you'll see exactly how that performs, and that's something you can share with your clients. And I think, you know, I sort of glossed over it real quick, but this test to failure mode to me is real interesting, right? So one of the things when I came to Tremco, you know, we were big on testing the standards, but I'm a lot more interested in failure mode. So I think a number of speakers today have talked about method of failure and how things fail. And what I am interested in as a manufacturer, and you heard us talk about it on AlphaGuard, right? Easy to repair. What do I want? I want an elegant failure mode. I don't want a catastrophic failure mode, right? If a roof failure mode requires a replacement of a whole roof, that's a real painful place for me to live, right? But if the roof failure mode, like on AlphaGuard, is a gentle wearing of the surface, and then you see that little gray layer, and you say, oh, now I just have to do that prime and recoat, that's a very, very elegant failure mode. So testing to failure to us is a really, really big deal, because from a manufacturer's liability standpoint, I detest catastrophic failure. I want elegant failure. I bought a few little samples with me, and so here's another little one that I have, and what makes this really special. So one of the things that we do very, very well is we do different sort of extruded gaskets out there, right? So I always try to simplify things. I'm an executive. I don't have a great technical background, right? So I think we live in either a wet world, right, a sealants world, or we live in sort of a hard world, a gasket world, or a sheet good world, right? So traditionally, today, if you want to have this sort of gasket thing take place, 2, 3, 4 years ago, if you were to come to Tremco and say, I want a custom gasket in here, I could put one of the construction sealants and waterproofing people on the spot, but it's a painful process, right? You take the geometry off of the building. You send it on into Cleveland, and some CAD people put that together, and then we got to cut a mold and basically extrude through that. That might take another 3, 4 days. Then we got to get it back out in the field, and you look at it on your building, right? So it's a 4 to 8 week process, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do today as well, and this is a great example of it, so today, with today's technology, we can take that geometry, in an hour or 2 we can get it translated, right, because you got your smart iPhones, and then that can get sent back to the field. Somebody can sit there with a 3D printer, right, and you got this part in an hour, that part's going up against your building, right? So we're able to do in 24 hours now. You heard Michael Cohen talk about these compressed cycle times. So one of the, you know, back to what we're trying to do on the interfaces side, right? So we're taking what used to be the applicability of these gasket systems due to this huge time delay going on, used to be this, and if we can compress this down now to a day type of process, right? There's a lot of restoration capabilities we can now do on that interface, right? Because we're using this type of basic 3D type capability. So I brought another little prop with me, and I ran this by John, who invited me here to say, you're really sure I want to tell this story? And so right here I have an example of a sensor, And if any of you hold a AA battery in your hand, right, that's really the form factor that this sensor is built around, right? So if you Google RPM, which is the parent company to Tremco, and you look at all the companies they own, one of them is called Drive It. Any of you who are in the cladding business, right, as a manufacturer, there are typically only two worlds you live in. You've been sued or you're gonna get sued, right? So it's a really, really big deal, and right, and as a cladding manufacturer, you're always very, very defensive. You're very defensive that your products are very, very good, right? But it's either a design issue or it's an application issue, take your pick. But it doesn't matter, you're the deep pockets, right? So many, many years ago, Drive It had already done a couple of iterations of this. And they came and they said, oh, we want to design a new sensor system, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could just had embedded sensors sitting in our walls, and we would know at any point that there was the onset of some sort of moisture intrusion, and we could immediately remediate that. So I wrote the specification for that, and we've had this technology for a very, very long time. So sort of an irony of that is that, so now that I run Tremco, you'd say, well, oh my God, why aren't we promoting this? Why isn't this in all our products? So I got to now turn the anecdote to 2007. So one of the things that I do today is there's 16 million square feet of roofing in RPM. And all that roofing's responsible to me. As Tremco Roofing, we eat our own cooking, right? So that means when my fellow president has a leak in his roof, I get the call. I really, really, really don't like those calls. So in 2007, I'm at RPM, I'm at the parent company, all capital reports to me. In 2007, I say all new roofs are going to be Tremco roofs. And I got this system. So I got this bright idea. We're just going to embed sensors into all these Tremco roofs that we put on. So here's where the anecdote gets a little bit interesting, right? And when we think about our perpetual buildings. So what do you think happened on the very first job? It was about 200,000 square feet. Takes what, a couple months to re-roof a job like that? So the sensors start going on day one. What day do they start going off? Day two. So what's the first lesson that I learned, right? I'm not running Tremco, I'm just an owner of roofs. We're a holding company, we've got many companies. I discovered maybe I didn't have the best contractor. Okay, good, I'm now gonna get smarter. Now I want a good contractor. So the next job goes on. Sensors go in. What day do they go off? Day two. Why did they go off on day two? Because I didn't have what we call job site inspection, right? And in my case, I didn't have somebody on the job that was constantly inspecting. I had a quality contractor, right? But contractors got a lot of pressures. So they can't watch every single person on that crew and what they do and so on and so forth. So went off on day two, but I'm getting smarter. So now I said, okay, now we're doing Tremco Roofing. It's always got to be a good contractor, and those things are easy enough for us to figure out. And I got to have job site inspection. So now I'm doing the third job. So now when are the sensors going off? I'm starting to win. They only go off in the 6th month. Well, now something interesting happens in the 6th month. The sensor goes off, right? So who's going to pay for this? There's only two parties, right, that could possibly pay for this in the 6th month, right? Those parties would be the contractor, or it would be Tremco, right? I'm RPM parent. But what's the word we use a lot in buildings or in roofing, right? We use the word leak-free. What's the definition of a leak, right? It's when you look up at your ceiling and you see water coming through. These sensors aren't about water coming through, right? These sensors are about that there's water in the substrate. There's moisture in the substrate. So I got my contractor saying, not my problem. I got Tremco saying, not my problem. Both parties are willing to take my money in month 6 to go in and remediate where this thing's going off. So this was sort of my epiphany, and certainly now that I sit at Tremco, is that we have a completely broken business model, right? We talk about this perpetual building, and so this is a little bit of an education for me that says, we embed these all over our buildings, right? Here's the interesting question. What happens when they go off? Who's going to fix the problem? Sounds simple, but sitting running Tremco today and sitting in this presentation, This is technology we've had for well over 10 years. It's omnisense.com. In the interest of full disclosure, it's my brother's company. He's one of the best electronic sensor people in the world. So this was an interesting little family project, pretty easy to do. But the industry says they want this. We have it. But why isn't it being sold, right? My brother's doing okay. He's got a lot of different customers, right? But why isn't the building industry rushing to this? Because somebody's going to have to pay for poor construction practices, not 10 or 20 or 30 years down the line, but 6 months later, or actually the second day on the job, right? Somebody's going to have to tear out what they did and fix it, right? So it's an interesting business model question. All right, posted number 3. Plain and simple. So I'm going to share with you, I am not a lawyer, and every time I read a warranty or some such legal document, this is the true story, right? If you ask me today, what does an indemnification mean? You think I should know that as the president of a company, right? But I do have a lot of lawyers that work for me, and so I detest legalese that I cannot understand, right? So I'm going to share with you what Patagonia says, right? The Patagonia Ironclad Guarantee, right? Great clothing. If you are not satisfied, you may return it for repair, replacement or refund. Damage due to wear and tear will be repaired at a reasonable charge, right? We can all understand that. And I think most of us are familiar with Patagonia, right? Very, very high quality product. I have Patagonia gear. I've had it for 30 years, and I expect it to last another 30 years, and if I so choose, I'll be buried in it, right? So I'm going to share with you the anecdote about where did Plain and Simple come from. So I am not a native to the roofing industry, meaning I own many roofs. I've owned them for many, many years, but I've only been running Tremco and roofing for less than 3 years. So I listen to my salespeople, right? So John Campbell's one of my sales guys. There's 200 plus of them, and they're all saying to me, "We need more years." I'm like, well, what does that mean? They're like, well, these warranties are coming out. They're saying 30 years, they're saying 40 years, and I want 30 or 40 years. And so I end up reflecting on that and saying, well, we have a problem as Tremco, because if we say 30, we mean 30. So if I warranty 30, then I'm going to have to stand behind 30, right? So that's sort of an interesting issue. But then I start asking us, I say, well, what happens when we put a system on? What do we do when we have a failure issue or we have some sort of a leak issue, right? My 200 reps say, well, we go fix it. That's who we are. So then I sort of have an interesting thought. I'm like, well, why should I be afraid then to put into warranty what we actually do as a business, right? Why should I have a problem with that? Then I have my next little bullet here, the lawyers. So I start inquiring within the company, why are our warranties the way they are? And I start hearing about the lawyers. And they report to me. They're a fine bunch of people. So you start to learn who's been writing my warranties. My lawyers have been writing the warranties. Does that shock anybody here? No. So I'm thinking, okay, where are we going to go with this? Now you've got AlphaGuard. Right, so for the first time in the roofing industry, I have technology that can truly last on an infinite basis. So the epiphany I had was I said, well, okay, my reps are going to ask for 30 years or 40 years. Well, I was like, let's just go to infinity. Let's just go to any number you want, right? AlphaGuard has the ability to be infinitely renewed, very, very elegant. So we're good to go on that. Then I want really, really simple language. True story. I sit with my lawyers on a Friday and I say, I read to them the Patagonia guarantee and I say, I want a legal document that works for you and works for me, and it has to have the same amount of words as the Patagonia document. And I want it on Monday. Because what I'm asking for isn't that complicated. And these are great lawyers. I'm right, this shouldn't take weeks of study. So they come back to me on Monday. And they come back to me with what's called Plain and Simple, and if you all have a copy here, the way they really ended up solving the problem was they said, we, Tremco, will do what our specification says it will do. And if there's a failure to the specification, we'll fix it, right? It's really basically what it says. And I thought, well, that was pretty smart of my lawyers to come up with that. I didn't come up with that, the lawyers did. So there was an interesting consequence to when this was done. So now I'm happy. Now I have plain and simple. So now any rep that comes to me and says, I need more years, I'm like, well, whatever you want. I don't care. 90 years, 100 years, I don't care. There's a formula that allows somebody to sign up for it. We also have part of that warranty says that at any point that you choose a certain period of X and you want a renewal, there's a very strong statement from us to say just bring it up to a normal performance level and we're good to go again, right? And you can only get that in AlphaGuard, right? You heard Chuck Fitzgerald talk about we sell all the other systems out there. There's no other system we have that has that ability to perform and be renewed like that, so you're not going to get plain and simple on that. But there was an unintended consequence that my sales team shared with me after a couple of months. They said, they said, we're getting really, really great reception in the architect, engineer, design community. I said, why? Okay, well, why is that? What does the warranty do? Right? Most of you here are design professionals, right? You've designed a building to a specification, and the warranty says these are all the reasons I won't do what you just specified. That's really what's going on with the warranty. It's in competition with your specification. And sort of the beauty of what the lawyers came up with is we point to your specification and say, we will do what's in the specification. That is the dominant reference. That's why there doesn't have to be a gazillion words in it, because it references the specification. So I didn't come up with that, the lawyers did. So pretty good lawyers. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our Tremco future. And I carry a rock around with me. 3 years ago, one of the RPM executive sort of traditions that goes on, that when it first happened, I thought it was a little goofy, and now we all sort of like it, which is we go to famous battle sites, and we do what's called a staff ride, which is where, and the first one we did, it was at Gettysburg, and pretty cool, right? When you go to Gettysburg and you read a lot of material, the Army War College is there, and we're getting sort of lectured on everything that went on during that period of time, and then you end up walking the battlefield. Pretty cool. So 3 years ago, we ended up going to Normandy. And, you know, of course, pretty emotional place to go, right? And this rock is from the beach at Omaha Beach, and so if any of you are familiar with that or you read after this, so the troops that landed there, right, ended up getting, those that survived got pinned by this sort of rock wall, right, called shingle, right? And so this is just one of the stones from there, but there's a quote from a very sort of famous general at that point, and the quote goes, he's General Norman Dutch Coda, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Division. So his quote goes as follows: there are only two kinds of people who are staying on this beach: those who are already dead and those who are gonna die, right? And so then, and he concludes with, now get off your butts, you're the fighting 29th. So I share this with you because within Tremco, the Tremco that I run today and that our people here are all a part of, there are only two worlds we live in: extraordinary urgency, or it's not getting done, right? So this sense of urgency, and so the first thing that I'll share with you on that sense of urgency is that all the new product development we do, we're basically designing new generation systems for everything we do. And the minimum table stakes is taking out 80% of the labor. It's not because we don't like our contractors. It's because there's a huge labor shortage, and it's never going to get better, right? So when you want to design these high-performance systems, you heard talked about today all the time, the buildings are getting more complicated, and yet there's a greater and greater labor shortage. So if we don't have a dramatically more efficient way, right, to get our high-performance systems on, that's just going to be a real problem for all of us, right? I'm not sure what the exact situation in Toronto is, but in many major metro areas, there's just dramatic labor shortage of all the different trades, and the demographics are it's never going to get better. So this 80% labor reduction, a really, really big deal for us. I commented on next generation systems, right? So Tremco has always occupied the position of saying, we are the best. And so we are developing next generation systems in every single major product platform we have. And you saw that today in AlphaGuard, and there's a follow-on to that coming, and over 20 some different product platforms. I'll share a few of those with you today. You are welcome to come see us, in some cases under NDA, and we're very open to sharing with you where are they going and what are sort of the time expectations. So a couple of the platforms that I wanted to highlight, we talked about vegetated roofing, right? So very, very much not only a growing trend, right, but the whole regulatory environment due to stormwater management, right, due to heat island effect and so on. So there are two things that we're very, very good at on VR systems, right? One is the waterproofing layer, but the other that's a little less understood is the growing media, right? So a really, really big deal you heard it talked about today is water retention. So we have industry-leading water retention capabilities where we can handle 300% more than anybody else in the industry. So that ability to retain that water, keep it out of the stormwater systems, and then the cooling effect from that, right? A really, really big deal. Our restoration coatings. You heard us talk today about EWS, right, from our folks over in the construction sealants and waterproofing side, right? Very, very, very important technology for us because you're basically able now to put a wear course on where you never could before. There's simply, the areas that were presented today by Imran, there is no other technology you can put down there to protect that surface. You heard us talk about bio content. So today in our AlphaGuard bio systems, we've gone from 30 to 40%. We're working with next generation that'll be above 70%, right? So in your design community where that's preferred, that's a really, really big deal for us to keep pushing that bio content. I've lived through a number of cycles today in what I call the carbon economy, right? Natural gas and oil, right? Very painful for Canada. It's going to be painful for the US. It's normal to think that we're going to live in this $2 gas, $2 per therm natural gas environment and $30 barrel of oil. I happen to be in the camp that says, yeah, these things cycle up and down, but long term, it's only ever done this, right? So to me, to be able to go to bio content, renewable content, it's not just that the market's requiring it. I just think over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the cycles that I've seen us in is there ends up being a shortage of those carbon-based materials. I'll talk a little bit about metal. Metal over shingle has been a really big breakthrough for us, right? So historically, there's a lot of shingle roofs out there and a lot of different commercial construction, and really the only answer was you might go over once and you have to tear everything off. So one of the innovations that we've come up with the last couple of years is how to put metal right over that. And not only just go over the shingle, but you end up with a dramatically better roof because of how you're managing that airspace between the shingle and that metal roof. I'll finish talking about two construction sealants and waterproofing systems. One is it's called Secure Rock ExoAir 430. So this gets back to the labor. So if you look at how a building is constructed in layers, right, or components or stick built. So in this case, what we're doing is saying, okay, you have your exterior gypsum, you got your air barrier. What if we factory applied the air barrier to the exterior gypsum? And that's what went on in the field, right? So that's been a very exciting program, a partnership between us and USG. And the next that I want to reference is a little bit of a sort of a different shift on this, which is called ExoAir T3. So one of the nice things about Tremco being part of the RPM family, it's a very, very big global company. So for a long time, there's been very different technology in Europe for how they deal with these interfaces and these gaps, these expandable tapes, right? So if you go to Europe, it's called Ilbruck, it's called the I3 system. So our strategic partner in that system is Ilbruck. We're over here, since we're Tremco, we're not Ilbruck, T for Tremco, right? So it's some real good marketing going on. But I use that as an example because you saw one system today, EWS. That's from, that technology is from and supported by our sister company. You heard it referenced, 20 plus years overseas. And T3's been around 50 some years over in Europe, but it's not conventional construction here. So one of the nice things that you have with Tremco is that we really are taking from construction practices all over the world, where all our companies are. These are all my friends, right? In my 13 years staying at RPM, right, supporting all these companies, they're just a phone call away. And these technologies are all coming to us, and we're bringing them to you. Let's talk about services. Tremco is not just a product platform, right, but a service platform. So you heard us a few times mention zero landfill. Today, here is the state today, and I've been shocked about how fast this has happened in the last 3 years. So remember in 2007, you hear me said, we're going to do these little sensor things? Earlier than that, one of the mandates that I had put out was that all our plants were going to go zero landfill. If you go to our Toronto plant today, here, it's a zero landfill plant, and it's a huge chemical plant, right? So it's a strong commitment to zero landfill. So think about zero landfill in our world, right, which is called construction and demolition waste. So I remember when I was heading up all the manufacturing, we're going zero landfill. So I'll share a little Dell anecdote with you. Many, many years ago, I'm an IT guy by trade, I open up one of my IT magazines and Dell says, we're zero landfill. I'm like, how is that possible, right? Everybody here familiar with electronic waste, right? Mountains and mountains of it. How is Dell zero landfill? I said, it doesn't compute. Well, here's their definition. Their definition is they don't make anything. They buy in components, they assemble them, and out they go. So they're right, by their definition, they're just a white-collar company, right? Zero landfills, recycling some paper and maybe some glass bottles. So here I am sitting at RPM, right, pounding my fist on the table, we're going zero landfill, but if you total together all the waste at RPM, it is a fraction of the C&D waste we generate in re-roofing as a company, right? So I could sit there like Dell and say how proud I am of us being zero landfill at Tremco, right? It's a pile of crap. Right? Because if the industry we're in is driving re-roofing and is driving C&D waste, right, we're a fundamental driver. It's 40% of all landfill waste, right? It's a huge generator of methane and all kinds of bad stuff. So what we today at Tremco have, anybody here can say, I want zero landfill on my next Tremco roofing job. And I don't care if it's a complete re-roof or if it's an Alpha Guard recoat type thing. We will, by default, provide you zero landfill services. Here's the other thing that's a little interesting anecdote, right? We're not a charity, right? I'm not in the altruistic business of making less money for zero landfill. But the other interesting thing that's now true is it's cheaper. 90-some% of the time, it'll be cheaper on that job to go zero landfill than to throw it away. Pretty easy decision to make. Why are we able to do this? In 2007, right, one of my other little bright ideas, I said all Tremco roofing projects from now on done in RPM will be zero landfill. So we've been at this for 9 years. Not easy to do. And we only just figured out in the last 12 months how to put the right team together and have that as a default service. The next service, we talk about roof tech. This is one of the benefits about being with RPM. So within RPM is a company called Legend Brands. Legend Brands invented 2 industries. They invented hard and soft floor cleaning, right? When somebody comes to you with their little truck and their truck mount thing and they clean your rug and they clean your tiles, that industry all got invented in the mid-1960s. And the founders of that company were all behind that. They also invented another industry. So today when you see these horrific weather events, right, where there's all kinds of floods and freezing pipes and so on, it's very, very good for business because they dry out buildings. So I took my whole Tremco team to Legend Brands when I first got to Tremco because I knew we had to clean, right? If you want to coat a roof, you have to clean it. And what's happening in major metro areas today, right? In the US, we call them EPA non-attainment zones. I don't know what you call them here. But you're not allowed to wash your roof and just put that stuff in the storm water. Not allowed. So we needed a system that could clean very, very well, right? Everybody knows surface prep is the single most important thing in a coatings job. And I needed to capture all that water. So we went to Legend Brands to put that system together, and we had a meeting all day, and we're all very proud of ourselves. That all got done. And at the very end, one of my colleagues at the meeting said to Legend, tell us what else you do. And they said, we dry out buildings. And we said, well, we have an interesting problem in the roofing industry. When the roof gets wet, all you can do is tear it out. And they looked at us and said, my God, we've been drying out buildings. We built this industry over the last 40 years. We just never knew that it got wet up there. So we've been partnered with Legend Brands. We call it Roof Tech 2.0. We've been in field pilot for a couple of years now, right? Our objective is to systemically dry out a roof assembly, no different than Legend today dries out the four walls of a building. Pretty basic technology, and we're just systematically going through that. So it's another service that we're working at bringing to market. Grow your own. I just talked about the labor shortage. So one of the things that I inherited when I came to Tremco is I asked in my first months, I said, how many people did we hire last year? And the answer was 250, 2,000 people company. And I said, how many did we fall short? How many have we tried to hire that we couldn't get in the last 12 months? And the answer was over 100. So I looked at our growth curve. I said, we're never going to be able to grow this company unless I can build my own people from scratch. So we've created programs now where we literally, what we target now is to bring people in either as interns or right out of school or no matter where you are in your career. And if you are willing, right, if you have the will, we will train you from the ground on up, right? So build your own is a really, really big deal because otherwise you cannot believably grow as a company. We're helping our contractors get better. If you go to our training center today in Cleveland, you're just going to find a whole bunch of contractors there, and we every week bring in contractor group after contractor group to say, we want to help you be more efficient and more effective and better at putting our materials on buildings, right? So it's a huge commitment from us that we have dedicated teams on, and we spend millions of dollars on. Big, big commitment from us. Safety leadership. One of the things that reported to me at RPM for 13 years was environmental health and safety. And one of my rules was if there were 13,000 employees, if there was an incident anywhere in the world, it's on my desk within 1 hour. And every single incident investigation goes something like this once you're dealing with it, right? Then you do an investigation. And in the end, it always comes down to the same thing. Knowing what I know now, what would I have done different so that incident didn't happen? So that was my responsibility for 13 years at RPM. It's my responsibility at Tremco. We are in the single most hazardous business, I don't know, maybe, what's the trucker, ice truckers, right? That might be a little more dangerous. The guys catching the crabs in the Bering Sea might be a little bit more dangerous, but going up and down ladders, going up and down buildings, single most dangerous business in the world, bar none, if you look at the workplace data. And I have over 500 techs that go up and down buildings all day, and I have over 300 field service, field salespeople going up. So I got 800 people all day going up and down ladders. It's just a sheer numbers game before we kill somebody, right? So that's my responsibility to not let my people come to harm. So one of the things that we did when I came in was to say, we are going to lead the industry in safety. So we've taken a huge effort to work with NRCA, work with the contractor base, work with our own people to take a big leadership in safety, but it doesn't stop with safety. One of the things that I discovered with my salespeople, and this is where the lawyers come in again, I said, who's in charge of safety on a roof? What did my lawyer say? Not us, right? What if somebody gets hurt? I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? We say who we are on the roof, and we turn a blind eye to safety on the roof because the lawyer said it's too dangerous, and it's where I'm sending my own people. So I said, well, that's not going to work anymore. So my mandate internal to RPM Roofing is we're going to take responsibility for the safety on the roof. So we have a huge partnership now with Key Safety Systems. We're partnered with other companies to where that roof needs to be safe. And so that's a key part of what we now do in the industry is to say that every single rooftop should have a very, very high level of safety. It's basic blocking and tackling, right? So that's another thing that we do on the safety side. And that one of the things that means today, I just sat in training, right? So one of the things I recently mandated, I don't know if you're familiar with OSHA in the States, I'm not sure what the Canadian designation is, but I mandated that every single Tremco employee that's going to go up on a roof has to have an OSHA 10-hour card. And one of those was me. So I sat in training for the 2 days before I came here, and one of the things I learned about in the class was some of the stuff we do that I didn't know, so more changes are coming. Whole building diagnostics and warranty, right? We talked about plain and simple. So we have proposals out there today where plain and simple not only applies to the roof, but if you decide to partner with a total Tremco whole building solution, I will commit to plain and simple for the whole building. It's never been, nobody does that. We've never done that before. So this whole notion of whole building diagnostics and whole building warranty, a very, very important service that we've really only just in the last 12 months gotten our act together to be able to do that together as one Tremco. But we have proposals out there today, and it's a commitment that I make to you, and it's a commitment that I've made to both of my Tremco teams, that we will commit to plain and simple on a whole building. It's not Burger King, right? I already told you that if you don't do Alpha Guard on the roof, not going to happen. Because unless you have the technology that actually backs up the promise, right, then you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble as a manufacturer if you say you're going to do that. Indoor air quality. So that's another thing that we're really, really focused on. And so indoor air quality, of course, is comfort. It's air handling. But it's another way to think about it, which is, to me, it's proactive that you don't have a sick building, right? So most of you are familiar, very, very famous sick building examples. I think it's a whole lot more interesting, rather than wait for the building to get sick or to have building occupancy problems, what if we proactively knew the building was okay, right? I was sharing at breakfast this morning, many, many years ago, I had this tremendous aversion to the dentist. Remember we were talking about personal care, heart attacks? So I got out of college, I had this really bright idea. I'm on my own, mom and dad don't tell me what to do anymore, and I hate the dentist. I'm not going. What do you think happened? About 10 years later, sitting in the dentist chair, and the dentist is wagging his finger at me, right? He says, Paul, little problems become big problems. And as scared as I'm convinced, by the way, I'm going to die in the dentist chair one day, but as scared as I am of the dentist, I go every 6 months. Because I'm absolutely petrified about what will happen if I don't actually get that sort of remedial review and care. So it's a thought I'll leave you with on IAQ, and it's a capability we have within Tremco. It's called Can-Am. What if we proactively, right, if it's a perpetual building, what if we proactively on an annual or biannual basis said, we want to know what's going on in that air. Are the air changes okay, right? Somebody presented earlier on commissioning. You know what's interesting about commissioning? It's done once. What if we checked the building out every year and said, now we know it's okay? So we're very, very active. We have a very, very close partnership with a company called Pure Air. They're very, very special. I think they're the only company like them in North America. And so that's another service that we're bringing to market now as part of our Can-Am team. ASU. So we talked about, one of the presenters talked about our ASU ratings. And one of the other things that ASU is a real leader in is procurement. And so if you occupy the space Tremco does, right, we're never going to be the cheapest. We don't aspire to be the cheapest. You can't do what we say we do and have the John Campbells of the world and the Imrans and the other salespeople of the world. You have to charge fair value for that to be that in the market. So we want the market to value what we call best value. And one of the anecdotes that if you go to an ASU presentation that they use that I just think is brilliant, when we want brain surgery done, right? When I want brain surgery done, right, what's my decision process there? I want the best surgeon who's done this thousands of times. I'm not going to bid it out. I'm not going to value engineer it. I'm not going to negotiate with the doctor. Right? So it's interesting. They'll share a slide with you comparing medical or brain surgery with how we buy construction products. And it's really an eye-opener because their whole point on getting best value outcomes is you need to employ or have a provider that gives you the best service. And so we're partnering with ASU because unless we get buying behavior to change, right? Many of us live in a public bid environment. It's all driven to low cost. So unless buying behavior changes, we can sit and have all the perpetual building conversations we want to have, but if it's so much as cost $1 more up front, never mind the change orders, right? Somebody else is going to get the work. So unless we change that, and we're very, very driven to be an advocate of changing that buying behavior. Facades. So again, today you heard from our construction sealants and weatherproofing people. One of my observations as an outsider to the building world, it's fairly intuitive in the building world about a roof. Everybody gets a roof for a roofer. But when it comes to this notion of a facade, to me, one of the epiphanies has been most of our roofing customers that we have today that are very, very good customers, if you go to their facilities manager or whoever's in charge of facilities and say, when your facade leaks, who do you go to? They don't know. There's no facade section in the yellow pages, right? There's a huge section for roofers. So they don't know how to think that way. And one of the things we're having great success with as Tremco is that if they trust us on the roof, they're going to trust us on the facade. One of the things I would encourage you to do that to me is it's a startling eye-opener in restoration is spend some time with your construction sealants and waterproofing technical support person and say, profile for me a bunch of the really cool restoration jobs that you've done on facades. I think it'll be a startling eye-opener. The other day I was with one of the biggest facade restoration contractors in North America. They're certainly one of the top 10. And we did a whole review with them of all those projects. They were absolutely startled with all the things you can do to remediate that facade that's better, faster, cheaper, that really gets you that outcome. Because, I don't know, it might have been Ted Kessick who said there's an awful lot of buildings that have been built in the last 20 to 30 years that when those interfaces, you know, you look at that pane of glass, everything around that pane of glass is going to be in trouble at some point. What are you going to do? There's a lot of solutions. I would tell you, if you spend time understanding what Tremco can do in that area, I think you'll be very, very pleased. Diagnostics. We have a phrase that we call leading with diagnostics. One of the things that's been a recent investment last 5 years in our construction sealants and waterproofing group is that if you have a concrete slab, what's going on there, right? We're often brought in because the coating has failed. Well, why? Right? Was it something in the concrete? Was it something on the interface? Was it something in the prep? Was it something in the coating, right? So the ability to have somebody come in and do diagnostics, whether it's the roof, whether it's your concrete substrate. So we have an extreme commitment to diagnostics capabilities. All right, services. My last post. How am I doing on time? Oh, okay. So my sort of closing comment to you, if you want a perpetual building, I really do think that Tremco is both capable and it's what we desire, right? It is the mission statement on the back of my business card by just blind, dumb luck, right? It's just what's been on my card for the last 2.5 years. And we'd like to be your partner to deliver on that promise. Thank you.